6th of August, when US President Donald Trump slapped India with an additional 25% tariff, taking the whole tariff amount to 50% higher than most nations, the question that was being asked was, what will India do to respond? And amongst all the clamor, some of the voices were advising and urging the government to act. The theory was, let's strengthen ourselves. Let's make ourselves more resilient to external shocks like tariffs in uncertain times. Well, less than a month later, less than a month after that 50% tariff was hit, we are set for one of the biggest reforms in recent days. As the GST Council meeting will take place, it could have a huge booster for the economy. This is truly a game-changing reform. Now, what does it mean for the economy? That's what we're going to talk about in this special show today. And we're getting you the data for that. Remember, it's a plus and a minus. Obviously, when GST rates are cut, and you will cut from 4 rates to 2 rates, the government will lose revenue. Remember, we trend to close to 1.6 to 1.8 lakh crore rupees on average a month from GST revenue. Obviously, we lose that revenue. That's the fiscal cost over here. But on the other hand, you're going to boost consumption. If things get cheaper, people will buy more. What does that do to the economy? So we've tried to break down the maths for you, that where it all settles. So this is what Citi is saying, for example. The fiscal cost is at 1.1 to 1.2%. Lakh crores, that is 0.25 to 0.3% of GDP. For Antique, they say 0.3 to 0.4% of GDP. MK says 0.4. UBS says 0.3. IIFL says 0.4. So on an average, say at the higher end, 0.4% of the GDP would be the impact. For a Kotak Securities and an Axis, it's slightly higher. Kotak Securities say it'll be 0.5 to 0.7% of the GDP. But what does it do to GDP growth is what you should also look like. And a lot of estimates talk about a boost to GDP. Now, this is what we are hoping to see. For Nomura, you could see plus 0.46%. For BOFA, you could see plus 30 basis points. For Ambit, you could see 20 to 50 basis points. So on balance, you might expect a positive. Now, that's the math. The question is, why is this important? Well, number one, it's certainly the most important reform in the last several years. It also looks like something that will give a huge spike to consumption, which is being underestimated at this point. GST could, in balance, trump the tariff attack, and this is something that India needs right now. What's going to be even more crucial than the rates coming in is a simplification of the input tax credit, inverted duty structure, all of the pain that smaller businesses have in actually adhering to GST norms. If that is taken away, the multiplier effect could even be larger than reducing to 2 tax rates. But we're going to be talking about all of that with our experts right now. We have with us Kaushik Das, Chief Economist, India and South Asia, Deutsche Bank. Pranjul Bhandari joining in, Chief India and Indonesia Economist, HSBC. Samir Chakravarti, Chief Economist, India, Citibank with us. Welcome to all of you and thank you so much for speaking with us. Pranjul, I'm going to start with you first. And you know, we're trying to do a little mental math here. If you look at the tax incidence versus the GDP consumption boost, does it even out in your view?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. So, of course, this is something we're all looking forward to. It's always nice to have a tax cut, especially in the run-up to a festival. You know, it makes you buy a lot of things. It's great for sentiments. I think something which the Indian economy and Indian markets need right now. So I would say that's a positive. The second positive is if this actually cleans up the structure a little bit, having lower number of rates, making it more predictable, then I think that can have a lot of ease of doing business benefits as well. So, there are a lot of pros. But at the same time, I think there are deep uncertainties out there which we should be mindful of before we put like lots of number out there that, growth could be higher by so much or not. And I think I just want to touch upon a few uncertainties. I think the number one uncertainty is what is going to be the net revenue loss coming out of the GST tax cuts? Now, if there's a net revenue loss, it means that the government is losing money, but the consumer is benefiting because on the whole, the consumer is not having to give that much of tax. But then the government is going to have to figure out how they share it between the center and the state. So I think sort of that is one part. On the other hand, if there is no revenue loss, tax cuts in one place are compensated by tax hikes elsewhere, then you will have to really question how much does the consumer really benefit. And although at that point, the government might be happy that they don't sort of lose revenues. What I'm trying to say is that there is no free lunch here. Somebody benefits and somebody loses. And I think we have to be very mindful of that at this point of time. One other point is that the manufacturers who benefit a lot from these tax cuts, will they use it to increase their own profitability, or will they pass it on to consumers as a reduction in final prices? That again will determine how much consumers benefit, how much inflation comes down by. And in the past, we have seen in many sectors, producers don't really pass through all of these benefits. So these are all the different things out there. But my general sense is, and I'll agree with a lot of the estimates which people have shown us, that there could be a growth benefit between 0.2 to 0.4% of GDP, or 0.2 to 0.4 percentage points on GDP growth.
Yeah. In fact, Samiran, I believe you have a slightly higher growth benefit number as opposed to the tax incidence. I'm going to start with the numbers and then get into the semantics of what will actually happen. But let's just get those numbers out there, because at the end of the day, it is going to be a tax revenue foregone. And the amount of boost to consumption is something we can only estimate right now. Samiran, your take?
So it's actually quite simple at a theoretical level to understand this, that money in the hands of the government is also spent, money in the hands of the consumer is also spent, but which has a higher multiplier effect is what we are debating about. When the government is doing a GST tax cut, the implicit assumption is that the multiplier arising out of the households spending the money will be more than the multiplier that would have come from the government spending the money. And how is this multiplier determined for households? Very simply put, out of this tax benefit, how much will be saved versus how much will be consumed by the households. At this point of time, this is a function of how confident the households are with respect to savings versus spending. These are difficult numbers to estimate at any point of time. But yes, we are hopeful that because this GST cut is coming on the back of other kind of stimulus, starting with the income tax cut, 100 basis point of rate cut from the RBI.
Suffice to say, Samiran is slightly more optimistic. Kaushik, what are the numbers that you have back of the envelope?
Yeah, Tamanna, it's easy to make these estimates on paper, but you should realize that we need more information from the government on what are the exact items which will go in which bracket, and after making those adjustments. Also, you need to factor in how people will behave. Obviously, people can wait till the GST rationalization takes place. So for all you know, September, a lot of people who would have bought things in advance probably could delay their purchase till the actual rate cuts happen on the GST front. So there are different dynamic, but the way to think of it is this is the next generation GST reform. This was overdue for some time. We needed to rationalize the rates and bring the multiplicity of rates to a smaller number of rates, which the government has done. So you need to think of it more from a 2 to 3 year, 5 year perspective. Is this good for the economy? The answer is yes, because this gives more money at the hands of people whom, people can decide how much they want to spend. So what could happen is that, people could delay their spending a bit till the GST rationalization takes place. But, in the next year, you could expect more consumption coming out of this lower GST tax net. Now, the issue is, could this have been done earlier? Yes, probably that this could have been done earlier, but this is coming as a response to the 50% tariff that we have from the US, and probably that will also come down over a period of time. But for the time being, we are stuck with this 50% tariff. So that will, on the balance, obviously be negative for growth. So if you do the plus minuses, probably the 6.5% growth forecast that we have for this year and next year as well, that India will manage comfortably. We already got a good GDP print in April, June. Those numbers are strong. So
sure.
Overall, I think the GDP should give more money in the hands of people, and you should get 6.5% growth. for
You know,
this and next year.
I don't envy economists right now because the amount of permutations and combinations you have to keep in mind before getting to your next GDP projections is going to be excruciating. We don't know if 50% is going to become 25% by November. We don't know what all of the other factors are going to be. Pranjul, but net, would it be safe to say that the consumption boost is very clear and it will be revenue accretive for most companies?
I think the consumption boost is clear, and I'm going to agree with Samiran here that it's not just the GST tax cut, it's a lot of other things that are coming together. The income tax cuts that happen in the budget, the fact that interest rates by the RBI have been cut a lot, so a lot of the household interest burden has fallen off. The GST tax cuts are happening now. Perhaps in the next 12 to 18 months, we'll see some eighth pay commission money flowing in as well. So I think all of that adds up. And my sense is that is sort of like the consumption boost that I'm talking about. I also want to take a step back and I want to say that I think there were already in the start of the year, we were seeing parts of consumption doing better than a lot of people actually give credit for at this point of time. You know, with oil prices being so low, with inflation being so low right now, my sense is that the purchasing power of the informal sector, which is the masses, had actually been improving over the last couple of months. And that is one of the reasons that the GDP number that we got for the June quarter, 7.8%. I know there are a lot of issues around it in terms of deflator, but even if you clean that number up, my sense is it did show growth was not as bad as a lot of people had feared. And I think what this was really picking up was the fact that the informal sector, the masses, I think also the masses, I think are doing better this year than they were doing last year. So we have all of that on one hand, and then we have all of the policy measures like tax cuts, both direct tax and also the GST. I think all of this together makes up that consumption story that I think we should be looking forward to.
So then what is the bugbear that we need to keep in mind as we roll this out? Samira, in your view, what is the biggest challenge? Because GST has always been something great on paper, but has taken time to roll out and smooth out the rough edges. What would you like to see as a very clear mission statement in the outcome of this meeting, which we'll see in the next couple of days?
So obviously, as all of us are saying, that a GST cut is not just a measure to boost consumption, but it also a measure to, as a longer term structural reforms in furthering the ease of doing business. So I think that component of the GST restructuring should be at the forefront, because you were talking about the bugbear part of it. The bugbear is, or the question that is there is that, is this going to be a one-time spurt in consumption, or is this going to be a permanent structural increase in consumption over time? Because there is a possibility that people are deferring some consumption right now. And the moment the GST cut happens, a lot of consumption happens at that point. But then we get back to the old trend of consumption also. So that is one part that we need to see. The other is that how is the consumer sentiment right now? Because consumer sentiment is a function of many different things, including how the consumer is feeling about the wealth effect. If the wealth effect is not strong enough, then some part of this GST cut could get just saved rather than being spent. I think these are the two things that, from a multiplier effect perspective of this GST cut, that needs to be seen, and associated with is the more structural ease of doing business part of it. If these two things fall in place, then this will be really a game-changing announcement.
You know, I think the other part of it is what happens to state finances, because this is also going to come in lieu of compensation cess. Do you think that more clarity is needed there? And I'm going to take that question first to Kaushik.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get more information on all this in the next 2 days, and how the government wants to, kind of distribute, the finances that go to the state. Different states will have different demand. So I think, we, made this calculation, and as you showed in your opening remarks, the kind of fiscal revenue loss that can come because of this. For this fiscal year, I think the number would be around 400 to 500 billion INR, which I think can be, kind of financed through the, GST compensation cess, at least half of it. And then, the rest the government can use T-bills to finance it. So it's not that big a fiscal shock as market is fearing it out to be. And I think the fiscal deficit that the government for the center has projected at 4.4 percent of GDP, that will more or less remain intact. We have a number slightly higher, 4.50, just to round it off, but we don't see much fiscal risk this year at least. And the compensation cess will go away by the end of this year. Instead of that 28%, some of the items will go to 40%. You could have increased consumption, not maybe immediately, but after the GST is announced over the next few quarters, you could have increased consumption, which can make up for some of the losses in revenue. And if you have to give to the states, they can work out a solution. Details will wait how they want to kind of finance it. But I don't think it'll be such a big problem that the fiscal consolidation that we have seen both for the center and the states over a period of time, that completely reverses and India is concerned about the fiscal outlook. The bond markets have reacted in a negative way, but I think if you go through the numbers carefully, the central government, I think, will manage the fiscal deficit at 4.5%, and states' fiscal deficit also would remain below 3% of GDP, which they have been keeping for the last few years. But the center will make it a point to ensure that the states do not lose the revenues in a way, and they'll plan it. We'll get the details. It's difficult to speculate at this point of time what arrangement they will have. But this 28% going up to 40% for some of the items, I think, can offset some of the concerns that are there without knowing exactly how the calculation will look immediately. We'll get more information in the next 2 days.
No, agreed. The question also is, where is the inherent consumption appetite, and does it exist to that extent? For autos, for example. Pranjul, let me come to you on that. With passenger vehicle numbers that we're seeing month on month now, there has been a downtick, there has been a pain. Now, my question is that will a consumer go out and decide to buy a car versus not buying a car, or buy a more expensive car because there is a GST cut? Is that what was keeping the consumer back?
That's a very good question. The truth is that when we think about what really drives consumption, like over a year properly, and we try to actually maybe model it in a particular way, our sense is things like a tax cut or interest rate cuts, they sort of play a secondary role. I think the primary role is all about wage growth, about the sort of the job you have, is it paying you enough, your real wages rising. I think that is sort of the main driver. So, you could be in a situation where you get a big tax cut, but you're not confident about your wages, your salaries, sentiments are not that great, and you end up saving this tax bounty rather than actually going and spending it. So I think these are some of the questions out there which are still not answered. And my sense is that eventually, if we want to talk about long-term growth in consumption, long-term growth in GDP, and all of that, I think we have to look beyond, a few GST tax rate cuts, and we have to think about important reforms. Now, from that perspective, the cleanup in the GST system is an important reform, but we still don't know where it will go. We still don't know how many rates we will eventually end up with. We don't know how, a lot of the ad hoc, put one item here, one item there, removing it, how we will get away from that regime, because that creates a lot of uncertainties in the minds of manufacturers and investors. So we'll have to see how the underlying GST reforms really pan out for the longer term benefit. The short-term benefit, which is just the tax cut, I think that will only have a marginal impact for the next couple of months.
Yeah, so I agree with you completely, and this is something that I said when we opened the show as well, that cleaning up the pipeline of GST is perhaps more important than what the tax cut is or what the rate is from a business perspective. But from a consumer perspective, Samir, I just want to get your sense in that, and that similar to the question that I asked Pranjul, is that inherent appetite there which can be flamed with a GST cut, or is there a bigger problem there that we're not yet seeing?
So, Tamanna, in economics, everything is ceteris paribus, everything else remaining constant. So when we have to analyze this impact of GST cut on consumption, we have to assume that this is happening on top of whatever the current situation is. And if we think that on top of the current situation, the GST cut will have zero impact on consumption, then we can all go back home. There is no role for policy at all. uh, because you can't change suddenly the employment or wage growth dynamics without a policy intervention like a GST cut. The expectation is that the GST cut is that catalyst which will drive some incremental consumption, which will start that positive cycle. That incremental consumption will probably lead to incremental investment, will lead to incremental employment and higher wages. That's how the cycle is kick-started. That's where this GST cut is important to get out of this sort of a doomsday type of predictions that people are having, that India's growth is stalled because of lack of employment and lack of wages. So in my book, this is the correct way to do things. Whether this will have X impact or Y impact, as I was saying, it depends on multiple things, how that multiplier will play out. But I can't see how this will have zero impact on consumption. That simply doesn't gel well with what my thinking is.
Okay, surely. What is it that you would like to see? Let's wrap up by saying that what is the wish list that you would like to see at the end of this meet and being announced? Kaushik Das, let me start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, it's already been made clear that there'll be two rates, and you want that simplicity to come through, and you would want most of the states to agree and be on the same page so that things do not get delayed. So the idea is to get this rolling before Diwali and by the first week of October, at least with the Dussehra time. So the states will have to agree, and so they should not come in the way of delaying this. So I would like to hear that the states are agreeing in principle, and then just putting the logistics in place so that we can get it going, because the faster you do it, the faster people will be able to take the decision to buy the products with a lower price. If it gets delayed, you're going to defer your consumption. But the bigger point is, if you think from beginning of the year, from the tax cuts, what Samiran was mentioning, the amount of rate cuts that RBI has done, the liquidity that RBI has given, the macroprudential norms that have been reversed. So it's not just GST cut in isolation. A lot of things have been done to boost domestic demand. So I don't see any reason why consumption will not pick up. And the whole idea of doing all this is to boost consumption and make sure that GDP growth doesn't fall just because of the tariff impact. So it could be coming a few months later if GST is getting implemented by October. But I think these are very good steps, and these are the second generation reforms that India need to ensure that
Sure.
consumption is strong. At the end of the day, consumption is close to 57% of GDP, and if you
Yeah.
can get that, that's correct. I think India will not have a problem to have growth between 6.5% to 7%.
Frankly, if you think of it as strategy, it's quite clever. We are a consumption-led society. We've been trying to improve our exports for years, but we are a consumption-led society. So we were relatively shielded with this tariff attack, which went across the world. And I don't think anyone believes 50% is going to last too long. Pranjal, a scenario where you have an efficient GST flow, rationalized rates, plus your tariffs start cooling down because common sense prevails. What does that look like?
Well, that looks wonderful, right? As in a way, I think a lot of us who have not marked down our GDP growth forecast sharply are just, hoping that, that day comes. And some comments that we've seen from the Commerce Minister overnight, still brings the hope that we will have a trade deal with the US and hopefully lower tariffs in the next couple of months. So I think that would be the good scenario. But, Tamanna, I'll go back to your question, which you asked Kaushik, that what is sort of your one wish list as we enter this GST meeting? And I would basically say here, and I'm going to have a slightly medium-term lens here, that states should come out not feeling too insecure about their revenues. I think it's important for state governments to feel secure that they will have enough revenues over time, because this security over time helps them improve their quality of expenditure. I think one thing we've seen over the last 5-6 years is state governments doing a little more capex than they were doing in the past. And I think that can go a long way into supporting India's medium-term GDP growth, get better jobs, and all of that. But they will only start doing all of these kind of expenditure on capex if they are secure about their revenue base. Because as soon as they get insecure about revenue, capex is the first thing they cut. And we need capex for long-term growth. So I hope states come out feeling a little secure.
That becomes very, very important. Last, word to you, Samiran. As we wrap up, one thing that you'd really like to hear, apart from what we already know, that there will be 2 rates and then we'll figure out which item is where, but the one messaging that you'd like to hear out of this meeting?
Before I answer your question directly, I think of one point that none of us mentioned about this GST cut is very important, that GST being an indirect tax is regressive in nature. So cutting GST is actually going to help a whole swathe of almost everyone in the population, unlike an income tax cut. So from that perspective also, this was a very required measure. What I would like to see is that lesser number of categorization within the GST. Right now, we have too many of such things. If it is priced more than X or priced more than Y, then the tax rate changes. These kind of classifications make it still very complicated. So although we might have currently about only 5 rates, but these classifications might imply that we have many such rates in effect. So once we reduce that, that is coming closer to the so-called uniform GST structure, which we aspire to become at some point of time.
So cleaner, simpler, and truly the good and simple tax. This GST power up couldn't have come at a better time. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. And to our viewers, we're going to be on top of this story. It's truly the biggest mover in recent times for the economy, for the markets, and can be perhaps the one factor that can trump tariffs.